arrived. I will call to order the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, May 11th, 2026, and ask Director Schmidtke to please call the roll.
Council President Madison.
Here.
Alder Revere.
Here.
Alder Bidever.
Here.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Alder Lankella.
Here.
Alder O'Brien.
Here.
Mary of Quorum.
Thank you. We have no general public comment, so are there any disclosures or recusals on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have a registrant wishing to speak on item 18. Are there other items that alders would like to have excluded from the consent agenda at this time? We'll also exclude item 19 because it's a presentation. Seeing no other exclusion requests, I'll just note that on item number 5, the recommendation is to place on file. So that's what we will be recommending to the council. Should you all vote that way? All right, so then we'll exclude items 18 and 19 and note that on item 5, the recommendation is to place on file. President Madison, a motion please on the consent agenda.
Motion to adopt. Second.
Is there, and thank you for the second. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda? Seeing no objection, we'll record those votes. And that will bring us to item 18. Item 18 is Legistar 92946, approving an intergovernmental agreement between the City of Madison and Dane County related to the operations of the men's homeless shelter located at 1904 Bertillon Drive, and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to sign that agreement, authorizing the Community Development Division to accept funds from Dane County to help fund the shelter's operations in 2026, and amending CDD's 2026 adopted operating budget to recognize the receipt of those funds and authorize their expenditure. On item 18, we have one registrant wishing to speak. Elise Selryer, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that right, of District 17. Do we have Elise?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Okay, yeah, I apologize. First time joining one of these meetings, so.
No worries.
Yeah, so for this item, I've been trying to monitor what's going down with the homeless shelter and the progress on that. So yeah, I didn't want to speak exactly for or against because this seems like mostly a budgetary to continue the development on that and get that opening, which I appreciate. I think there's going to be some good services there. However, one thing, I'm out in the community a bit doing volunteer work with them. And I guess just with this being the finance meeting, I kind of want to bring forward my understanding up to this point is that there's been talk of, also eventually financing some sort of overflow shelter and all of that. And just I wanted to register my opinion that, opening this new shelter without plans for that overflow shelter fully thought out is little irresponsible. There's already people sleeping on the streets because the shelters are overflowing. And with the new shelter not having the same number of beds, there's definitely like improvement in quality of like the stay there. But there's a lot of people on the streets right now. And just, I'd like to urge the committee and like, when considering finances for this and other projects to really think about that impact of all the people out there. So.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions for our registrant? Seeing none, thank you. On item 18, President Madison, a motion, please.
Motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. On item 18, are there questions for staff? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. And I was hoping that Director O'Keefe, yes, he anticipated the questions. Thanks, Jim, for being here. I found your memo from March to be extremely helpful and answered so many questions that many in the community have. I was hoping just to start, would you mind perhaps updating your March memo for us here in this meeting in essence, and just quickly going through it and giving us updates? If it would be easier, I'm happy to ask you specific questions now, but I thought I'd see if it was easier for you to just give us an update on where things are that you addressed in that memo.
Well, Alder, let me begin by confirming what I had suggested in the memo, that there were several sort of technical or legal steps that would need to be taken before the shelter would open, and one of them was the approval of an intergovernmental agreement between the City of Madison and Dane County that is before you today. We will, provided the council approves the document, we will bring that back to the council at your May 19th meeting. If it's approved, it will then go on to the county board. Their schedule has it being acted upon by the latter part of June. We are simultaneously negotiating a facilities operating agreement, as that memo had suggested we would need to, between the City of Madison and Porchlight, the selected operator for the shelter, and that agreement is a little bit different than the purchase of service contract that is already in place between the city and Porchlight. The facilities operating agreement speaks more to responsibilities for the use of the building and Porchlight's inhabitants of it as that shelter. So we've got some issues that are outstanding between the city and Porchlight. We met as recently as this afternoon. We're trying to tie those remaining issues down and get that document to the Porchlight Board of Directors. So that would be another big step. We continue to work and I think are nearing an end. Alder, we meaning staff from the City of Madison and from Dane County and from Porchlight, continue work to develop the operational procedures, policies, and protocols that speak to how this facility will function day to day. It's easy to forget that there's more change coming when we open the new shelter than just moving the operation from the temporary location on Zaire Road to a new location. There are some fundamentally different aspects of the new operation. Most notably, it will no longer operate as a drop-in shelter, so that requires a fair amount of additional structure in those policies and procedures that I spoke about. That in combination with its capacity, which is 250 people, and the prospect that there may be more people that might wish to use the shelter than there would be room for. That's going to require a lot of thought and specific policies around how we will, the collective, we will prioritize who's invited to use the shelter, how vacant beds will be filled, what the expectations of shelter guests will be, so on and so forth. So that's coming along pretty nicely, but there's a lot of work that entails, and we've been at it for many months. So those things are all coming together, I think, fairly well. Again, as was suggested in the memo, it continues to be the case, Alder, that the shelter will open operating on an overnight basis only, and the additional funding needed to go from that to what we all want, which is to operate it 24 hours a day. That additional funding, which is somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million a year, that is money that is going to need to come from our friends and colleagues in the private sector, from non-government sources. And I think you're all aware that there is an organization, Shelter Friends of Dane County, that has been stood up and is leading that private fundraising effort. I mentioned that, I think I had mentioned that they had received some early good response to their work. That continues to be the case. They are expressing confidence that they will be able to generate the money that's needed to go from overnight to 24 hours. It's going to require a little bit more than just that funding. There'll be additional staff that'll need to be hired. I think it's a less heavy lift to go from where we are now to an overnight setting than it will be to go from overnight to 24 hours. But there's still going to be additional work, and our understanding, I guess our best estimate is that it will likely be several months at best between the time that the facility opens and that it might be able to function on a 24-hour basis. So I think those are the kind of the main points, and I'm happy, Alder, to respond to more specific questions that you or other members of the committee might have. As I'm looking at this now, I see the reference to an overflow shelter and heard the comments from the public speaker just a few minutes ago. The Dane County RFP process is a little bit more closed than those that we operate in city government. So we don't have a lot of information. We don't have a lot of insight into the county's RFP, which was soliciting a potential operator of an overflow shelter. But we do know a couple of things. We know that there is a single response that is being considered by county officials. We believe that it is likely the county is going to extend an invitation to that organization to set up an overflow shelter. We believe that the funding that is available is insufficient, certainly to operate an overflow shelter on a full year basis. And so we're obviously very interested in what that looks like and have some reservations about how it might function and how it might function with the new shelter that will open. And so we'll be paying very close attention as that process plays out. But again, it's a much more closed process, and I suspect we won't learn about the county's decision until they bring that decision to the board.
Thank you, Jim. You anticipated many of my questions. I appreciate your responses and do have a couple of additional questions I'd like to ask you. The main question I receive from folks in the community is, when do we anticipate, of course, the opening of the new purpose-built men's shelter to be? I've been saying sometime this summer. Is it possible for you to narrow that down a little for us this afternoon?
Yeah, and Alder, I don't want to be coy about this, but neither do I want to. We've a couple of different times we've projected an opening, only to find that we're not, when that date arrived, we're not quite there yet. We all want this to be successful. We all want to get it right, and so there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes work that is being done around those operational policies. The intergovernmental agreement and the contract between the city and Porch Light, those have to be in place before we open. And as I mentioned, the county board, best case, won't take their action on the intergovernmental agreement before the end of June. So that probably puts a bookend on the front end. We're likely not to open until very late June or early July. And then it depends, I think in part on how quickly the city and Porch Light can hammer out the few remaining details on that facilities operations agreement. The construction of the shelter is substantially complete. There needs to be a final cleaning. There needs to be some installation of furniture. We certainly want Porch Light the opportunity to get into that facility and find their way around the commercial kitchen, because on the day that it opens, they'll be expected to be preparing meals at the facility. So the other ways that Porch Light staff will need to familiarize themselves with that building and its systems. So we're not going to be open before early July. I would like to believe that we'll be open in the summer. So that July, August time period seems like a reasonable estimate. But again, I don't like to kind of make guesses and get expectations raised and then not be able to meet them. So I'm just trying to be pretty cautious.
I appreciate that, Jim, and I realize I put you on the spot. But thank you for emphasizing the earliest the opening might be, given the additional requirements that are needed by policymakers over the next several weeks, among other things. So thank you for that. In terms of the transition, I'm sure that Porch Light will be providing plenty of notice to the current shelter guests as to when the actual opening will occur, and that must be part of your conversations. I know that a memo or letter was already distributed to the guests a few months ago outlining the changes and procedures for them. And did you say that some of those are still being negotiated between your office and Porch Light? Or is that part of it pretty much settled? How?
So I think that goes, Alder Verveer, to the operational, the policies and procedures. Yes. And those are largely completed. I think the most difficult issues have been addressed. They have been mostly shared with at least current. I was part of a meeting out at the shelter a couple of months ago, joined a couple of my colleagues and county staff and Porch Light staff, and we had a series of group meetings with people who were using shelter, describing some of the changes that were coming and how it might impact them. I think we were a little bit cautious about projecting dates because we were even further away then. And so we've had those face-to-face meetings. They have received written communications about what is coming. And Porchlight is now in the midst of working with small groups meaning about 30 to 40 people at a time, focusing on those who are most likely to be invited to make that move to the new facility because they meet the prioritization criteria, and also working with those who are perhaps less likely to make that initial move, in the interest of doing everything possible. So Porchlight and other service providers continuing to work with shelter guests to help as many folks as possible get into housing and not need to make the move at all. So that work is underway. It'll continue right up until that transition date.
I appreciate that. And then have you heard that once the transition actually does occur, is the plan that there will still be transportation provided to the shelter guests from the new purpose-built men's shelter to the Beacon, as is currently the case on Zaire Road?
I think the expectation, the operating expectation is that transportation services will continue until we make that transition to a 24-hour operation.
Yeah, thank you for confirming that. And then the transition that we're all hoping for, that you've acknowledged earlier, to the 24/7 operation. I really appreciated hearing that there's still some optimism with the Shelter Friends group in terms of their fundraising. Have you heard anything as to when they might share publicly an update on how their campaign is going?
I don't. I think they would be willing to share information, and Alder, we can make a point of finding maybe the best way to do that at any time. They've been pretty open about their progress. This is going to be something that is going to continue, I'm sure you know, for a number of years. They're simultaneously raising funds to meet real-time needs, even as they try to capitalize an endowment that will hopefully reduce the ongoing annual fundraising need. So they're doing both of those, and I think they're because they share our desire to get to a 24-hour operation as quickly as possible. I think most of their efforts thus far have been on the year-to-year fundraising. And I think I'll say again, they have expressed confidence to us that they can fill that funding need in pretty short order. They've suggested that they would have the means to close that gap and allow for a 24-hour operation before the end of this year.
Thank you very much for that. Again, I really appreciate hearing that optimism. And then just lastly, if we could go back to the point of the speaker that we had this afternoon, and you obviously already addressed it in part, but the need for additional emergency shelter space and Dane County Human Services, I know publicized a notification of intent to award that $440,000 emergency overflow shelter grant to Madison Street Medicine. But you, just so I understand, I heard you have not had any communications with Dane County Human Services or with Madison Street Medicine at this point about that?
We have not.
Okay. And I know in the past you've said that there's a assumption by many that our Zaire Road facility might be available for that overflow shelter, and that city engineering was planning to do an assessment on the needs to upgrade that facility, if indeed that might be the case. I know plumbing is a major concern, as I recall. Has city engineering done that assessment yet, Jim?
I do not believe that they have, no.
Although you should not assume that Zaire Road is available.
Thank you, Mayor. Is city engineering still planning to do an assessment or no?
I think that they will.
Okay.
Yes. And I would, Alder, certainly plumbing is a major issue, but that building has taken something of a beating. It's functioned longer than I think we expected it would. It's served a whole lot more people than we expected it would. So I think there will be other needs that they'll find beyond plumbing, but they've not yet had a chance to do that assessment. And we've made it clear to our colleagues in Dane County. We've made it clear to service providers. We've made it clear to anybody that has listened to us exactly what the mayor just said, which is people should not presume that facility would be made available.
Yes, and my understanding, and I will yield now. I know that Alder, both the current shelter and the future shelter, are seeking recognition. Let me just close by saying I believe that my understanding of the application to Dane County Human Services proposed that the overflow shelter be at St. John's Lutheran Church on East Washington Avenue. Is that your understanding, Jim? Or you really haven't heard?
Yes.
That is your understanding?
Yes. But I have not seen that proposal, and I've not spoken to anybody either with Dane County or Madison Street Medicine about it.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate all your responses very much, Jim. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alder. President Madison?
Thank you, Mayor. First, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just maybe one clarifying question and then just a question for Jim. So at CDBG, Lynette Rose put on a really great presentation recently, and also at the City County Homelessness Issues Committee, either last week or right towards the week before, they gave some updates on the current shelter use numbers. And the numbers at that time were, I think, 273 individuals had used the shelter that previous night or a night before that. But I just want to clarify and be clear that folks who are using the temporary shelter right now are not being asked to not use the shelter if they don't have a bed at the future shelter. I just want to be sure. I don't think that's happening, but I want to clarify that is not happening.
That is not happening.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is just to clarify, and Lynette did a good job of explaining this at CDBG, but I think it might help others on this call and other auditors who may come back to listen to this meeting. But there was a question sent to us, and Lynette really explained at CDBG about the IGA, the agreement between the city and the county. And I think it's the last couple sentence or two where it talks about I think it might be the mayor and the executive, but anyway, the city and the county can sign this agreement without it coming back to Common Council and the Board of Supervisors every year. It is my understanding after listening to Lynette's presentation that it will be the same agreement being signed over annually. The only time it will come back to either body or both bodies is if there were changes to the agreement. But if there are no changes and everybody's still in agreement, it would just, be signed, I guess, annually. Or could you clarify that for us?
Well, Lynette's a tough act to follow, but it's my understanding that this IGA is effective through December 31st of 2026. I have to believe this is a new venture for us. I have to believe that we will learn some things, that we'll see the wisdom in making some adjustments, and that we may want to revisit this agreement. There are some provisions in it that were kind of imposed by the Dane County Board as they adopted their budget and appropriated funds to support the shelter. And they have to do with some of the operational policies that I was describing to Alder Verveer. So I think there's a pretty good chance that at least the next IGA may undergo some change and may require the scrutiny of both the Common Council and the Dane County Board of Supervisors.
But just to clarify, if there are changes, it would definitely come back to the bodies. It wouldn't just change without coming back.
Yeah, I think the next, and minimally the next IGA, the 2027 IGA would come back.
Okay, all right. Thanks for clarifying. And the last guys want to make sure I say that everybody listening should go back and listen to Lynette's presentation at CDBG recently.
Yeah, and Alder, we or President Madison, it's going to take me a little while to make that adjustment still. We have attached now that PowerPoint presentation to the Legistar file if people want to take a look at it. And certainly at next week's council meeting or at any time if people have questions about it and want to reach out to either myself or Lynette, should feel free to do that.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, President Madison. Alder Matthews, questions?
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a couple questions. This one's short and hopefully there's an answer, but to give kind of as a contrast between the new shelter and the Zire Road location, Jim, do you know, or anyone on the call know offhand, like approximately the number of like bathrooms or toilets that are in Zire Road versus in the new building?
So I don't have those numbers in my head. What I can tell you, Alder, is that they are both the bathrooms and the showers, they are numbers that are required by building code requirements. I believe that there are more showers and more bathrooms at the new facility than there are at Zire Road, despite the fact that at least currently Zire is serving a lot more people than the Bartolon facility will. I can certainly get those. I've got those in a file someplace. I just don't have them in my head.
Yeah, I'm sorry to throw that on you. But yeah, my understanding, at least just in a broad sense, is that there's a lot better, not just that they're brand new, but just the number of and type and, having like different areas that have bathrooms and things is just a lot better at the new facility. And then my other question, I think might be more for finance, but that clause that Sabrina mentioned at the end about things potentially not having to come back to the council, this agreement by itself doesn't appropriate any funds, right? Like whether or not the agreement could be signed in the future without coming back to council, both the council and the county board would still have to separately put funds in the budget to go towards this. Is that correct? Like that's a separate process.
Yes.
The answer to that question is yes, but coming from David will be more.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to
be subject to appropriation by both bodies for all of the operating funding for the facility.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just want to, I think most of my questions were answered. But in summary, this is a contract for the 2026 dollar amount that the county approved last year. It's clearly stated in the resolution and in the contract. So for those who have confusion about future years, I'm confused about that confusion, but I just want to clarify that. And then the terms, I think, Jim, you said, so we had the funding transfer. It's like two things that we're doing on this one. We have transferring the funds from the county to the city, and then the other one is a little section with terms that, please clarify, you're saying that based on our learning experience through all this process, we may go back and redefine those as needed. Correct?
I think that is very likely to be the case, yes.
And then we already discussed that this contract does not provide any funding for the overflow. That is on the county process separate from ours. So the only question I have that I need a little bit of clarification, because it seems like, okay, the shelter is complete and construction completion is either done or almost done, and we need to plan for a period of time for the porch light to go in and prepare, get around the building before we open the doors. So while all of that happens, we still, the Sire Road shelter will continue to operate, regardless if it opens in July or in August or whatever. So the funding that we're discussing here is still in play to maintain the operations of Sire Road. Is that accurate?
Yes, Alder, I think you're getting at a very important question, though, which is that Dane County appropriated in 2026 about $1.43 million to support shelter operations throughout 2026. Some of it taking place at the temporary facility at Zaire, some of it becoming available when the new facility opens on Bartolon. They are contracting, the county is contracting directly with Porchlight to convey their funds for the Zaire Road operation. And they are transferring their funds to Porchlight through the city for their support at Bartolon. And there was uncertainty when they passed their budget. There is uncertainty today as to when that move will be made. And so the resolution tries to address that issue by talking about conveying up to a certain amount of funding for use for Bartolon, because the longer into the year that we go, the more of the county funds will need to go to sustain the Zaire Road operation, and less will be needed for the Bartolon operation. So that's something we're just going to need to monitor. I don't know if we will. I hope we don't need to have to come back and tweak those numbers and tweak our budget when it becomes more clear when the actual move is going to be made. But we're very well aware of the fact that the county funding is being treated in different ways depending on whether it's supporting the temporary operation or the new shelter operation. So I think that might be what you were getting at.
Well, I mean, I'm also getting at the fact that I know that we have been in negotiations for a while, and it sounds based on your discussion that the city is fairly ready to pass on the keys. So I'm wondering if there has been any discussions about imposing deadlines for these agreements to come to a completion, for all the parties involved. We have Porchlight, we have the board of Porchlight, and we have the county also involved. So there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of cooks on the kitchen. So I'm wondering, what is the plan to get into alignment and finalize the opening date? Like, do we have, let's not forget about the Friends of the Shelter. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. And I still like to get more clarity on what is the timeline? Because I imagine you guys are running this like a project. What is the project timeline for the other agencies to get closer to a resolution? And you
Yes,
don't
Alder,
have an
I'm-
answer to that, but I'm just like trying to understand that part, like,
Yeah.
making it clear that this is not a city-only operations. We have all these partners that we're working with, but I'm still unclear on what is expected from them to finalize the agreements.
So I am very well aware that there are a lot of parties involved and a lot of moving pieces here. This one, the intergovernmental agreement, is an important one. And as I described earlier, the timeline for it has the county board acting on a parallel resolution to the one that is before you in the latter part of June. And so that that's the reason for the earliest we would be able to open would probably be that early part of July.
Okay.
The facilities operating agreement between the city of Madison and Porchlight, that does not need to come back to the council, is my understanding. We'll certainly be willing to brief you on it if you so desire, but that's not a contract. We don't typically bring contracts to the council, unlike the county, by the way. So that's just a matter of us getting on the same page, and it isn't operational until both parties agree to it, and for Porchlight, they're going to want their board of directors to be comfortable with it. So that isn't so much a factor in determining a specific date, except of course we can't proceed if we don't have a working agreement with the county. And then the last piece, the operational policies and procedures, those have to be in place before the facilities agreement that I just described can be finalized, because there is a provision in that contract that calls for Porchlight to produce operating policies that meet the approval of the city of Madison. I don't know if I don't think I got you any closer to an opening date, but
I mean, I don't need an opening date. I just want the public to understand that this is not just solely on the hands of the city. There's all these partners that are playing a role, and just I feel like that needs to be clear, and I think you did that already, so I appreciate it. And then the last thing it's a question, but I don't know if you had the answer, so I probably should just give you the answer. If people want to learn more about the shelter friends, is there a website that they can go to? And if you don't have it in front of you, I can provide that. Okay, provide it. I just want to keep up with the thing of questions. It's shelterfriends.co.org if people wants to go and visit that page. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Alder.
Oh, and congratulations, Grandpa.
Thank you, Alder.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff on item 18? Seeing none, then item 18 has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, item 18 has been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 18. And that will take us to item 19, which is Legistar 93042, an overview of 2027 capital budget requests. we'll turn it over to Budget Director Coe.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining, and all the alders who are not usually on Finance Committee for attending. Today, I'll go through a presentation that summarizes the 2027 capital budget requests that were due a few weeks ago and made publicly available last week on our website. All right. So we'll go through some of the major changes and highlights of the 2027 request and look at this in a few different angles, from request by funding source, by major projects and agency. And then we'll talk about the budget timeline and process and how you all can be involved moving forward. All right, so the first section is looking at the request by funding source. Before I proceed, I just want to make a quick note on the analysis that you'll see moving forward. As many of you know, the CIP, or Capital Improvement Plan, includes the next year's budget as well as a 5-year outlook. So for the 2027 budget, we're looking at the 2027 budget as well as a plan for 2028 through 2032. When we're comparing the current year adopted CIP, or 2026 CIP, with the 2027 request, we're looking at the 5 overlapping years of the CIP. So in the current year budget, we have 2026 and nothing in 2032. And then in 2027, we start in 27 and go out to 2032. So when we're comparing, we're just looking at the years that overlap so that it's more easily comparable. In some cases, we might refer to funding in the very last year of the CIP, 2032, but that will be explicitly noted. So when looking at the request, the overall request is $286.4 million than the 2026 adopted CIP, and this is looking at all funds. In the graph that you see on this slide, the darker color represents the current year, the 26 adopted CIP, and the lighter color is the 2027 request. And the solid portion of the bar is all sources of GO borrowing, and the hashed section is all other funding sources. So you can see in pretty much every year of the CIP, the light color is greater than the dark bar, and you can see how that funding source breaks out by type. So as I mentioned, in total, between 27 and 2031, the request adds $286 million. And of that $286 million, $164 million is GO borrowing. And then in 2032, the request adds an additional $283.5 million, of which about half is GO borrowing. Just to put this in context, the 27 request is significantly greater than the increased request at this point last year in the budget process. So last year, when we were working on the 2026 budget, agencies requested a budget that was $62.7 million higher than the 2025 CIP. So that was about a 9% increase. Between request and the adopted budget, we actually reduced the total budget to add $55.2 million compared to the 25 CIP. There were some modest adjustments made throughout the process in terms of adjusting timelines and funding sources for some projects. But this reduction from the request was really by removing or pushing back a few projects. So there were 3 or 4 projects that really made up this difference. In the 2027 request, again, the $286 million increase is a 26.3% increase to the current year adopted CIP, and this is 5 times greater than the increase last year. So this is orders of magnitude larger than the increase requested last year. When looking at just the new GO borrowing that's being requested, this is looking at all sources of GO, so so what you can see in this graph is just the solid portion of the bar in the chart I shared 2 slides earlier. So you can see, again, the dark color is the current year CIP and the light color is the agency request. You will note that there is a decrease in 2027, so there is a reduction, and that's primarily due to moving money for the South Police District and Property and Evidence Facility. Most of that construction funding is moving from 2027 to 2029. So there is a $32 million decrease in 2027, but there is a pretty significant increase in 28, 29, and 2030 that averages about an additional $60 million a year. And then there's an increase in 2031 and an additional almost $140 million in 2032. In terms of the impact on debt service, the agency request did not set the agency request guidance did not set a ceiling or a specific a limit on how much new borrowing agencies request, but it did have an overall target of keeping debt service levels at or below current levels throughout the SIP time horizon. So here we have a line chart that shows debt service as a share of the general fund budget. This dark teal color is what that debt service share is under the current SIP. And if we did everything that was requested, you can see in this purple line that debt service would grow pretty significantly and reaching almost 20% in the out years. And there are some other technical adjustments to this model that account for higher interest rates than where we were at this point last year. One other funding source to note is the change in federal and state funding assumptions. So again, the hashed, this is just state and federal. The darker color is current year, 2026, and the light color is the 2027 request. In total, the request adds about $56 million in federal funding. This is primarily in Metro, traffic engineering. Metro was about $46 million. Traffic engineering adds about $8 million. And much of this is related to different federal grant opportunities or federal formula funds. And it assumes some funding will continue for tax credits for geothermal projects under the Inflation Reduction Act, which is one component of that bill that still remains in effect throughout the time of the SIP. There is one reduction. There are some reductions to state sources, primarily related to removing about $7 million in state funds from the water utility that's replaced by geo borrowing. So most of the change in this graph is related to adding federal sources. And then finally, we have a table that show variances in funding sources. So the difference in funding sources between the 2026 SIP and 2027 requests that are greater than $1 million, along with a few comments that highlight some of the major changes. So again, we talked a bit on that graph about changes in geo borrowing. And so you can see the dollar amount by general fund and non-general fund sources, and a few of the major projects that are driving that change. In the case of general fund borrowing, this is primarily the addition of new facilities being added to the SIP. We have a similar, we have lines for the state and federal sources. So again, I noted the increase in assumptions around Metro federal funding, traffic engineering, and geothermal projects, as well as the reduction in state funding sources for water. And then there's a grouping of all of the other sources in the budget. The most notable change here is adding $33 million in the CDA budget, mostly for the Triangle redevelopment, but also their affordable housing program, some changes to impact fees, other government payment for services. This $5.4 million is related to the John Nolan Drive jurisdictional transfer. A large increase in reserves applied. $20 million of this is related to the water utility using reserves for a meter infrastructure project, as well as increases to TIF increment across several agencies. So zeroing in on a few major projects, these few slides won't talk about every change, but are some of the largest items that you might want to dig into more within the agency requests. Of all of the all the increases in the SIP, one of the largest categories of increases are major facility projects. So facility projects add about 144 million across all funding types. So a few of these I talked about on previous slides. So the CDA redevelopment triangle redevelopment project adds 25 million compared to the SIP. Monona Terrace has about a little over 5 million added for energy efficiency projects. Police South District Station, the construction timing moved, but also the project increased by about 5 million due to updated construction costs. Within the engineering facility groups, there are a number of shifts across programs and projects. The CCB office remodels, the total budget hasn't changed, but there is a timeline change within the SIP. Engineering facilities also added a new project for a North District Police Station and Fire Station 10 that adds about 35 million to the SIP. And then there were several changes to various street facility projects. So they reduced budget in a general streets improvement program and increased the budget in a few of the standalone projects for the Badger office remodel and Sycamore remodel with associated funding. And then there is also funding related to the Parks O'Dana Hills Clubhouse, as well as transportation proposing a replacement to the Sale Street facility at 64 million. So when we're looking just at 2027, this slide highlights all of the changes that were greater than $1 million. So anything that had an increase or decrease compared to the 2026 SIP of more than $1 million. So I mentioned one of the changes within engineering facilities was to reduce the budget in 2027 by 8.3 million and move that back to 2029 for the CCB office remodels. Adding funding for the Fire Station 10 and Police North District Station to start that work. There's a $1 million decrease in engineering major streets for the Regent Street project, but that again was pushed back. It wasn't removed from the SIP, it just changed years and was pushed back to 2032. There was an increase in the library's request to add $1.1 million for the library service and support center for a siding project. There are various shifts in the Metro budget to add a preventative maintenance program and make some adjustments to transit buses and charging equipment. Within parks, you'll see an increase for the O'Dana Hills Clubhouse. And the biggest change in 2027, as I mentioned earlier, is removing funding for the South District Station and pushing it back to 2029, as well as some changes in stormwater quality system improvements. In 2028, the slide similarly shows the major changes that were plus or minus $1 million or more. So again, there is a reduction. There are some reductions. Those are highlighted in red text. Engineering bike ped, Stoughton Road. The Stoughton Road project is reduced by $4.1 million. And then there are some notable increases here with engineering facilities, adding the construction funding for Fire Station 10 and the Police North District, the Streets Badger office remodel, increasing funding for the Engineering Major Streets Reconstruct Streets program, adding money in Metro for preventative maintenance, adding funding in Monona Terrace for the building improvements related to energy efficiency and traffic engineering, adding funding for Safe Streets for All, a federal grant match, transportation funding for the Sale Street facility replacement, in stormwater utility, adding 1.9 million for Warner Park relief storm sewer, and in water, 1.5 million in new water facility planning. And this slide and the previous slide focused on changes to geo borrowing. And then two other tables that we provided for reference that I'm not going to read through, but I'll explain how to read them, are highlighting all projects that had a variance of more than $1 million in any year of the SIP. So here in this table, you'll see the agency, the name of the project, and then the dollar amount that changed in each year of the SIP, so 27 through 21. or 27 through 31. So in the example of Stoughton Road bike ped enhancements, you can see the decrease in 2028 of about $4.1 million. But that really is pushing the project out to 2029 and 2030. So you can see how much is added to the future years. So anything that's in this yellow shaded color means that there's a decrease in the year. In many cases, you'll also see if it's decreasing, it's usually because it's being pushed out or the timeline is changing. So you'll see an increase in a future year. And then the red, if it's just red, it's an increase. So this table shows all of the engineering agencies. And then the next table is a similar format showing all of the other agencies. Okay, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the agency request summaries. I'll go through how to find them on the website. I'm not going to read through all of the agency highlights because there are many, and I think that looking at the materials online are probably the best way to get a sense of what all of the agencies requested. So we do have all of the files that were published last week on our capital budget webpage. And this year we have two different files. We have a summary file that has like a 3 to 5 page summary that's prepared by the finance department that has a highlight for every single agency. And this is intended to be a shorter, more accessible overview that you can quickly skim. And then if there are specific proposals or agencies you want to go have a deeper look at, we do have a full agency request packet that has the summary file that's included in the summary, as well as the agency's transmittal memo where they explain what their priorities are in developing the budget, as well as a capital proposal form for every single project or program that's in their SIP. So I'm just going to share quickly. This is the city's budget webpage, so cityofmadison.com/budget. If you go to the 27 budget timeline and click on agency requests, it will take you to this timeline and you can see our capital agency requests. You can review the mayor's message and guidance and what guidelines agencies were given. You can see the request summary or the complete packet. So the request summary is about 110 pages and you can click through each section to find an agency that you're interested in. So finance is a pretty simple capital budget. You can see we have one program. You can see what the funding sources are, and then some tables and a description of major changes that are prepared by the budget team. And then if you go into the full request packet, you can use the bookmarks to navigate, but you can see, for example, in CDA, you'll have a similar type of summary page and description of major changes, and then you'll get into the documents that the agencies themselves submitted. So you can find the agency's transmittal memo where they are explaining what their priorities and methodology were for developing their requests, as well as these detailed proposal forms that explain what people requested and why. So that is really the best place to get information about all of the details that you'll see, if you want to dive into anything in particular. The next few slides, again, I'm not going to read through this, but this is just doing that comparison between the 26 adopted SIP and the 2027 requests, and just a few very high level changes. So here, in all of these slides, the agencies are grouped by functional area or agency type. So this is all of the administration and general government agencies, which include finance, IT, and the mayor's office. There's not a lot of change in these 3 agencies. The next group is planning and development, so the PCED agencies. Again, the biggest change here is within CDA redevelopment, and this is primarily funding for the Triangle project. And then you can also see within EDD, there's a $2.2 million increase for TID-supported projects, and minor to no changes in planning and CDD. Within the next group is public facilities, which are the zoo and library in Monona Terrace, as well as public safety, so fire and police. many of these increases. So some of these projects, agencies had no change. The ones that did have change, these are related to some of the facility projects I spoke about on a prior slide. In police, there's also a new program for body-worn cameras and an equipment replacement program. Within engineering and utilities, this is one of the larger groups of agencies. A lot of these changes, the biggest change between years is within the facilities management section. And I talked about a lot of those changes when I highlighted facility projects. And there are a number of other reallocations within programs across this group. And then we have all of the other public works agencies. So this includes fleet, parks, streets, and water utility. There were some increases to all of these agency budgets, many related to facility projects, but also equipment and asset replacement. So fleet, the increase is related to various equipment replacement, lifecycle management programs. There are increases to parks across a number of programs, and water utility. One of the largest increases here is related to the advanced metering infrastructure that utilizes reserves. And then the last group is transportation agencies. So you can see a relatively large increase in Metro and transportation. Within Metro, I mentioned earlier that there was a significant addition of federal funding assumptions related to formula funds and the local match. And transportation, this big increase is primarily related to the Sales Street replacement. And then there are increases also in parking and traffic engineering. The TE increase is related to federal funding as well. One more note that I will add about agency budgets is that in every year when we publish the executive budget, we include a list of carry forward appropriations. So these are projects and programs that were approved in prior years, and the funding is carried forward since the capital budget is a multi-year fund. Sometimes folks will ask, why don't I see a specific project that I remember us talking about last year? And that might be because the funding was fully allocated in a prior year. So this is just another reference or resource that's not available at this moment, but is something to look forward to in the executive budget that might help you understand the full scope of funding for a specific project. All right, and then I just have 2 more slides to wrap up regarding timeline and process. So for 2027 budget development, we are kind of still in early stages. We've received all of the agency requests and are doing some internal briefings later this week, and we'll be working on developing the executive budget later this summer. That's introduced to council on September 8th. There will be briefings with the Finance Committee September 14th and 15th. There will be a week period where you can submit amendments to the budget, and there will be a deliberation meeting on September 28th. And then the budget as amended by Finance will be referred back to the full council. In the operating budget side, we are preparing right now for the operating kickoff, which will occur on June 9th. Agencies will have 5 weeks to submit their requests, which will be due July 17th. And then we'll have a similar internal briefing process in August, and the executive budget will be introduced October 6th with Finance Committee briefings October 12th, 13th, and 26th. And then the full council will consider both the capital and operating budget on November 10th for up to 3 days as needed. And in terms of keeping Finance Committee as well as the council informed, we have a tentative schedule for future briefings. We're currently planning on June 1st to do a review of how the prior year ended, so how 2025 ended, as well as a preliminary look at our 2027 cost to continue and the direction for the operating request. On June 29th, we will go through the operating budget instructions, which will have been released a few weeks earlier. And then on August 31st, we'll do an operating request overview similar to this overview, as well as talk in more detail about the budget amendment process and the briefings that will be upcoming in September. So with that, we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Christine. Are there questions on the presentation? Going once, going twice. Christine is too good at her job. All right. Well, then, thank you, Christine. Let me just say that I did send an email to the council, but I will reiterate now. As you are looking through the capital budget requests, I encourage you to send me an email or a memo with any thoughts that you have, projects that you're particularly interested in, projects that you think should not go forward, anything that is of particular need in your district, projects that are not on the list yet that you're interested in. I would encourage you to talk to staff about those first, but I'm very interested as we go into putting together the executive capital budget, if there are things that members of the council particularly want me to know about. So I encourage you all to send memos. Item 19 does not require any action. So that does bring us to the end of our agenda, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing no objection, we stand adjourned. Have a good afternoon, everyone.